Hi everyone, I'm Donna Druchunas, and this is a session of Procreate and Tech Tips for SAW Sequential Artists Workshop. And today we're going to talk about masks. And I think I'm going to dive right in. So I'm going to spotlight my iPad for everyone so that we can look at what I've got going on there instead of my face. So this is going to turn off my other camera because you don't need to see me when we're looking at the iPad. So this is my iPad. We're going to talk about masks. And I made this silly image and it says, no, not this kind. And that's sort of true and sort of not true. Masks, one of the main features masks do is hide things. So it sort of is this kind of mask. But of course, that's just a silly joke. We're going to look at three things that Procreate calls masks, or that people call masks when using Procreate. One is alpha lock, and Procreate doesn't call that a mask, but you'll see why it's in this category when we look at it. We've got a clipping mask, and we've got a layer mask. So we're going to look at those three things, and then we're going to go in and look at some of my comics and drawings, and I'll show you how I used them. But first, I'm just going to show you how they work. So I've got this little drawing here that we're going to look at. We're going to look at three leaves, and we're going to use alpha lock on one, clipping mask on one, and a layer mask on one. So I'm going to turn them off, and I'm just going to turn on only the alpha lock one for right now. Now, so there's our leaf. And if it was a comic, it might be outlined in black as well, because we have our inking layer, and usually we'd have your ink on another layer. So just in case you're most comics artists do stuff like this. So you'd have like your ink on that layer, and depending how tidy you are or not tidy like me, you'll have your color not sticking out from your drawing. So we're going to turn off the inking layer for now. We're going to work on the color layer. I'm going to say we have this leaf, and I want to add some more detail to it that has nothing to do with the inking. In the coloring, I want to add some shading and some lines. So, let's say I want to draw veins and things on my leaf in another color green. Well, I certainly don't want it to look like that, right? I drew just directly on the layer that had the color for the leaf. And I'm going to take all that off that I just did, because we don't want those lines sticking out. We want to go right up to the edge. And if you're like me, when you try to be careful, your lines get really wiggly and the line width changes. Trying to draw things really precise is not good for me. I need to be looser and faster. So I want to draw some veins and things on this leaf without going outside the lines. I turn on alpha lock. And so there's two ways to do that. When you click on the little picture of the leaf in the layer list, you'll see there's a thing called alpha lock in the menu. So you can do it that way. Or you can swipe to the right with two fingers to turn alpha lock on and off. And when you have alpha lock on, you can tell because it's checked in the list, but also when you look at the little icon here, it has a checker box in the back of it. So there's your leaf and a checker box in the back of it. Look at my other layers that do not have alpha lock on, and it just has solid area or surrounding the leaf. This one has checkerboard. Okay, so I have alpha lock turned on. I can tell because there's a checkerboard there. Now I take my darker green color, I take whatever brush I want, and I can draw my lines as sloppy as I want. And inside the leaf, of course, any sloppiness shows, but you'll notice that my drawing does not extend past the end of the leaf. So alpha lock locks everything that is blank in the layer. Okay, why is it called alpha? This I'm going to show you. This may help you. Pretend we are filming a movie, and this guy is our character on the set. Or maybe he's the weather person on your TV show. And we want to put CG animation in the frame with him, or we want to have the map and video behind him. So we only want to film him with our camera. So when you're on a TV or movies, you probably heard of something called a green screen, right?
Right.
So a green screen means everything outside the person, they have green there, and that creates in the video, technically, something called an alpha channel. That's where this term comes from. And what it means is everything that you want erased. We only want to film this man. We want to hide everything else. So we film it on a green screen that gives us the ability to put other stuff where the green screen is, which is the dinosaur or the weather map or our robot or whatever we have that's not really there, because the guy is talking to nothing. He has to imagine all those things. So I think that we all know what that is. So, and that's what alpha lock is. So when we have that layer and we turn on alpha lock, it doesn't turn it green like a green screen, but it means that everything that we can't draw in the blank area. We can only draw where there's already pixels. So, whoops. So you'll notice something now, though, in this layer, it's all on one layer. I drew on the same layer. So if I wanted to change the color of the light green now, I'd have to go in and select all the bits of light green, and then try to change the color. Because we drew other stuff on that layer. So that's the limitation of alpha lock, is that it puts what you're doing on one layer. So it's handy if you're running out of layers. It's handy if you're doing something pretty simple and you're sure it's going to be okay. I can continue working on the same layer, but say I want to add just some texture, and I turn alpha lock on. I know it's still on because I have my checks. So I can add this texture. Oh, but look, the texture's going over the light green and the dark green. I really only wanted it on the light green, but I have to do selections and stuff if I want to separate them. So alpha lock is good if you want to add like one thing to a layer and you don't want to, make sure you don't draw outside the lines. We can turn our ink back on and off. But the limitation to it is it's all on the same layer. So you can't like just hide the green lines the way I can hide the ink, because the ink's on a separate layer. So I can hide it or turn it on or erase it and change it. I can't really erase those dark lines on here, because if I do, there's no green of the leaf underneath it anymore. So what's alpha lock good for? Coloring within the lines, but it makes everything on one layer. Okay, I tend to use more layers whenever I can, but sometimes I run out of layers, or sometimes I'm just doing something simple and I know it's going to be all right, and I'll use alpha lock. Okay, I think that's the simplest one.
Oh, darn.
Okay, no, just so we're gonna go over it one more time, and then I'm gonna show you.
I totally get it. Yeah, it's perfect, and I need it for something.
Yeah, it's
Very
just
happy.
that you are making a shape, and then you want to add some texture or color or a shadow to it. It's really cool for a shadow. So watch if I turn alpha lock on this, and I pick like black or a darker green, whatever, and I pick a soft brush. That's the airbrush. I just happen to have it in my list of favorites, but that's a soft airbrush. If I go off the side, see, I can just add a shadow to my circle, but it doesn't draw on the outside. If I had turned alpha lock off and tried to do that, it's just a mess. So Alpha Lock forces you to color in the lines, but it's all on one layer. So now that shadow is there, it's part of that layer, okay? So yeah, that's the simplest one because basically it's not creating extra layers and it's just forcing you to color within the lines, okay? Second one we have is a clipping mask. And I am going to go over these again, showing you my examples. But the second one we have is called a clipping mask. Now, we have this very same leaf, or very close. I drew 3 leaves. Now I'm going to show you how to add the lines on a separate layer, but still be forced to color within the lines. So with my leaf layer selected, I'm going to add another layer that comes above it. Okay, so now let's say we wanted to do the same thing we did before, which is add some nice veins on this leaf above it, you know, on this leaf. But I did it on the layer above it, so I can turn it off and on. But again, I colored outside the lines, right? And I don't want to do that. Well, here's the cool thing. I can go to this layer and I can click on it, bring up the menu, and you'll see a thing called clipping mask. Watch this magic. Bingo. It colored within the lines of the leaf below it. Okay. If you look closely on yours, and it's probably hard to see on mine, but if you look when you're working on this, when you make a layer that says clipping mask, it will have a little arrow here that points down to this layer. This layer, the original layer, is the clipping mask. The layer where you clicked clipping mask is not the clipping mask. That's why it has the arrow pointing down. It's saying use the layer below me to cut off everything outside that shape. So everything outside the shape of the leaf is cut off in the layer that I drew here. So the clipping mask is the shape of the leaf. It's clipping or cutting off everything outside of the leaf on the layer above it. So what's cool about this is now, if I want to change the color of the leaf, I can just change the color of the leaf and it doesn't change the color of the veins. I can do all kinds of things to the leaf, all kinds of things to the leaf, like say what I wanted to do before was add the texture. I can do that. Now still I'm on the same layer as the leaf. So here's another cool thing. I'm on my leaf again. I can add another layer. And because I had a clipping mask, anything between those 2 layers also gets the same clipping mask. So anything I draw on this layer between the lines and the leaf is also going to stay within the lines. So you can have more than one layer that is clipped to the same shape. Now, what's interesting is that if I turn the clipping mask check off, it hasn't really erased anything. It's just hidden it. So I can turn that clipping mask on and off. If I turn the clipping mask off on the one that's closest to the leaf, they all turn off because you can't have a layer in between. So when you have a clipping mask, the top one with the arrow really controls the rest. I don't use more than one a lot. Usually I use one, but sometimes I use 2 for adding 2 things like this, like a texture and details. Okay, so what's going on with the clipping mask is it's just like Alpha Lock. We don't want to draw outside this line, but we want stuff on another layer. So basically, these are by having this layer and having clipping mask checked, it's going to work just like Alpha Lock did, but on separate layers. And this is the shape that gets cut out or clipped. Everything outside that shape, it's like clipping with scissors. That's where that name comes from. So does that make sense? A little bit? Okay.
So Donna, I had a question. So if you had multiple objects on the layer you called clipping, when you put the layer above and clip it to that, are you clipping the clipping layer to every painted object on that layer? Okay.
Now,
Thank
okay,
you.
so in this case, I just drew another leaf on the same layer. So there's 2 leaves on the layer that says clipping, right? Watch what else happens if I turn the layer called clip that I called clipping off, all the layers that are attached to it with the clipping mask arrow also turn off. They can't show up because this is not showing up. So they become linked together. Now, this stuff that I drew, even if I turn off the clipping mask, it still doesn't reach the second leaf. So that's why the second leaf is still blank, right? But if I have the clipping mask on and I want to draw something on that layer, and this is just for illustration purposes, I can draw, see? I can draw over multiple shapes. So basically what it does is in this layer that I have called clipping, there's paint or ink or color in the shapes of these 2 leaves. And out here, there's nothing. There's no pixels. Notice I have my background turned off. If my background is turned on, usually it's white. And this confuses people sometimes because they think that there's white in there. But on that layer, there's nothing. It's see-through. You're seeing the white. That's the background layer. And you can change your background layer by clicking on it to any color you want. So by default, when you open a new document in Procreate, it makes a white background. If you want to be sure that you don't actually have white paint on this layer, you can turn off the background, because it is possible, of course, to draw something that's white. And then if your white background is on, you don't even know that that's there. But if I go to my layer that is clipped to that layer with the clipping mask, I can draw on that, even though it's invisible, because there's something drawn there. It's not really invisible. It's just the same color as the background. Well, even though I'm going to usually leave the background on in my comics for later, sometimes when I'm working with clipping masks or just coloring things in general, I turn the background off so I can make sure that I don't have any white stuff there that's not visible against a white background. And I know some people have had questions about that before. So say we had this second leaf and I draw this here. If I erase, it shows the green leaf because I had it on as a clipping mask. If I erase some of the green leaf, it shows the background. And if the background's white, it shows the white. But a lot of times when we're doing comics, we might have something like I'm just going to make a new layer so I'm not dealing with all that mess. So we might have this layer turning on just the one layer. We might have our comics character here, right? And it might actually have white inside it. Now, if I go and erase something on this, it looks like I just erased the black, but I actually erased the black and the white. And when I turn the background off, I can see there's a hole in it where there's no white or black. So turning the background off, if you're coloring things and it's a good thing to check periodically if you want to make sure that you haven't missed anything that might be white on your drawing that is there and will mess up something later. Okay, so alpha lock, we're drawing on the same layer, but we're making it impossible to draw outside the lines. That's the first one. The second one is clipping mask, and we are drawing on another layer, but because the layer is attached to the leaf with the clipping mask, and you can have more than one that are right above it, it is also forcing you to color within the lines. And it doesn't matter if you have one or two leaves. That's the same thing as alpha lock. Just to make it clear, if I go to my alpha lock layer and turn alpha lock off, I can draw a second leaf. If I turn alpha lock back on and pick another color, I can still draw on both leaves. It's all about where is pixels or ink or paint on your canvas and where is nothing. And nothing, where there's already nothing, it doesn't let you put anything. It stays nothing. So I hope that helps. We're going to go more, but I want to go over the last one, just the last one, so you know there's a third thing. So these two are coloring, forcing you to color within the lines, alpha lock and the clipping mask, forcing you to color within the lines, but we're either on one layer, excuse me, which has its limitations, or on multiple layers. The mask is something completely different. So say we have this leaf, and we want to make a hole in it. Well, I could go here and I can erase a hole in the leaf, right? And now we can make sure there's really a hole and not white paint in there by clicking off our background and it turns gray. Okay, so I can do that, but now my leaf has a hole in it. So if I want to fill it back in, I have to paint it again or drop my color in or something like that, right? So that's one way to do it, and go back up all the way with undo, tap, tap with two fingers. You can do it multiple times. Go back all the way to that and say, I want to create a mask that covers up part of the leaf as if it's erased, but I'm not really erasing it. So now I go to the layer and I click, instead of alpha lock and clipping mask, I just click mask. And it's making a layer here above it that shows just white. White. Sorry, I don't know why that, I set a setting for that menu to come up and I can't figure out how I did it and I need to shut it off. So that menu that pops up there sometimes, sorry about that. I changed the setting and I don't remember. That's the quick menu. Okay, so here, if I take the layer mask and I draw with black in the layer mask layer. So notice whenever I click on this layer, both layers are highlighted, but one is darker than the other. So the one that's darker is the one you'll be drawing on. If I draw with black, now I have a hole in my leaf again, but my whole leaf is still there. So I didn't really lose anything. I didn't really destroy my leaf. And the layer mask can be any shape. Anything you draw with black on that layer mask layer will take away part of your leaf, but only temporarily. Okay, so this is like what we do with masking fluid on a painting, only after we paint. So if you're painting with turn my background off. If you're painting with watercolor or gouache or something, you can put down some masking fluid, right? And we can put it on a new layer so it'll illustrate this properly. So I can, if I'm painting watercolor, I can put down some masking fluid, right? Then I can go with my paint and I can paint the leaf. And I can remove the masking fluid and it will leave holes in my leaf, right? Well, here it's just the opposite, except instead of putting the masking fluid on before you paint the whole leaf and then you put the masking fluid where you would have wanted it to be. So you don't have to put it on first and then peel it off. You're just drawing it on black on that layer mask layer. Okay, so we got the easiest one, which is alpha lock, which means you have something drawn on a layer. Doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what color it is. You want to only color within the line, so you swipe 2 fingers to the right. And now when I draw on that layer, I'm forced to color within the lines of what was already on that layer. Wherever there was nothing, it stays nothing. Okay. Clipping mask is the same thing, except that you have multiple layers. So we don't want to add anything to the main, when you click and hold, it will turn on one layer. Then if you do it again, it turns on everything. So I don't want to draw my extra things on the same layer. I draw it on lines, layers above it. But because I have these set pointing to the leaf as the clipping mask, so the leaf is the shape I want to be my lines, to stay within the lines. So I go in the layer and I say, clipping mask, clip this to the leaves. Same thing here, clipping mask, clip it to the leaves. And it does the same effect as alpha lock. I can only draw in the lines, but it's on extra layers. And you can have more than one clipping mask, but they have to be all in next to each other. I can't go up here and make a clipping mask to go down to here. They have to be right in a row, 1, 2, 3. I can put another one in. If I add another layer in between these, it automatically gets clipped. But if you don't want to worry about multiple ones, just think of it as the alpha channel, the alpha lock, but on a separate layer. And then the last one is the mask, where you're actually drawing something is like temporary erasing or erasing without destroying your drawing. Okay, let me show you how I use these, and that might help more. Is there any questions before we go again? What happens if you draw on the layer mask with another color other than black? You can only draw on it with white, black, or gray. White is the window, meaning you can see what's there. Black blocks it out. So black is like masking tape. If you're painting, you know, put down masking tape. And gray is like see-through masking tape. It's not all the way blocking, or it's like a screen on your window where you can sort of see through it. So there's really fancy stuff you can do with a mask if you use gray, but I only ever use it with black and white. I just want to hide something. So that's how I use it. Okay, so let's talk about what you can do with these. And I have 3 things I use the masks, the different mask features for: texture, coloring, and hiding stuff.
Excuse me,
Okay.
Donna.
Yes.
What did you say the white was like?
White is like a window. White
Oh.
window. I got this from Lisa Bardot. White window. You can see through the window. It doesn't block out anything. Black blocks. So when you in the mask layer, whatever is white, you can see. Whatever is black gets blocked out. I thought that was the best like little thing to remember it, because WWBB, white window, black block. because people get confused about which is which. And I do too.
Thank you. I do too.
But the third one that I showed you, the layer mask, is the one I use the least. So we can use masks for texture, color, and hiding stuff. Okay, so let me show you some examples. Well, we're back to this. We have a leaf and a sweater. So we're gonna do some stuff to this. Okay, so let's just look at the leaf by itself. And again, I wanted to add some details to it. So I have my leaf flat color, which is, just like what we did, just the shape. I have my ink from my comic, and then I wanted to add some veins and textures. So I can go to these layers, just like we did before, and say clipping mask. And this one doesn't really need a clipping mask because I didn't color outside the lines. So I can leave it how it is if I want, or I could say clipping mask just in case I decide to add more. And then if I want to add more texture or a shadow or something, I can go ahead and do that. And it doesn't color outside the lines. It's really cool for shadows, isn't it? Isn't that really cool what I just did? So the soft brush from the airbrush folder works great for that. And I make sure the transparency is in the middle, and then you make it whatever size you want. I'll undo it. And so I've got black selected, or you could pick a darker color of the green. I picked the soft brush from the airbrush folder, and you mess around with what size you want it, and make sure the opacity is not all the way at the top. You want it to be somewhat transparent, and then you can just go along there and add a shadow. And the nice thing, if you make it really transparent, you can add it gently in layers instead of, you can build it up slowly. And isn't that cool how it just makes the leaf look 3D? So for shadows, for adding things, and I almost always will do this with the clipping mask, because then if I don't like it, I can turn it off. And I don't have to start over again because it's all on one layer. Okay, so for this, I would use clipping masks, and I have a couple of them. I have the first one, which was the veins of the leaf. And I have the second one, which now has the texture and the shadow on it. And sometimes I'll put the texture and the shadow on one layer, but sometimes I would just add another layer in between there where the clipping mask arrows are on. And then I can, now I can add, I don't know, brown spots to my leaf and still not go outside the line. I can choose a different brush and add, come on, choose the brush. I can add really ugly brown spots to my leaf and it still doesn't go outside the line, so long as it has the arrow pointing down. So that's what I use this for. So this would be like a leaf in a comic, and I want to, usually what I do first is my ink, and then I add a flat color, which is just a plain shape filled in with solid color. And then I can add more stuff to it with the clipping mask feature, and none of it colors outside the lines. But I have it on separate layers because I decide, nah, I don't want brown spots. I can delete the brown spots without messing up the lines or the texture. Okay. Now I've got this sweater here. Here's and I've made a color layer for it too. So I've got the flat color for the sweater and the ink. And I'm gonna add texture to this with the dark blue. And I have these brushes of knitting stitches and fabric textures like denim and things like that. And a lot of times I'll do this just with Alpha Lock for fabric. For some reason, I'm not afraid to add it to the same layer. So I turn Alpha Lock on and I just paint my knitting stitch texture on, and there it is. I didn't color outside the lines because I turned on alpha lock for that layer. When I turn alpha lock off, it's still the same. So unlike the clipping mask, if I turn the clipping mask off, I would have had coloring out here. But because I used alpha lock, there is no coloring out there. I colored inside the shape. It's set forever inside the shape, but it's on that layer. I do that a lot. I don't find that scary to me where I want it on another layer. So alpha lock is good for adding, for me, for adding texture. I don't mind that. Here's another thing. Here's another cool thing. What if I wanted to color the sweater with that? Well, I could go to this plaid and I could take my eraser and I could erase it all around the outside, right? I could do that. I could go to my inking layer and I can take my selection tool and automatic, and I could select outside the layer, and I could go to the plaid with my selection still active, and I can cut it. That works, right? I just erased what was outside. And that's cool, but what if I decide, I don't like the blue on the plaid, like right in the center of the dress. I really want that diamond up there. Well, now my plaid doesn't fit inside my sweater anymore. So let me show you the third way you can do it, which is I can go to my ink. I can select anything. In this case, I'm going to select the outside. Am I on the ink layer? Yes. Select, automatic. There we go. I'm going to select the outside and I'm going to go to my plaid and I'm going to make a mask. Just mask the layer mask. Oh, nothing happened. Okay. I don't know why this happens, but sometimes the layer mask is not clicked on. So I clicked it on. Uh-oh, it's backwards. It made the mask from the selection, not from me painting it. And guess what? The outside is white, so that's the window. The inside of the sweater is black, so that's blocking the plaid. That's not what I wanted. If you get it backwards, this is really cool. You can click on the little icon. Your menu comes up for the layer mask part. Remember the one that's darker of the pair, they're tied together. The darker one is what you're working on. If you click invert, it switches the black and white. Now the background is black and blocked, and the sweater part is white and the window. And look what's really cool is I can move the plaid around. Whoops, still have my selection on. I turn my selection off. I can move the plaid around. Whoops, okay, that doesn't work how I thought it did. I've done stuff like this before and I don't know. So it doesn't do exactly what you want, what I wanted. I wanted to be able to move the plaid around and it would stay inside the sweater, but that didn't work. Sorry about that. So I'm going to delete the layer mask. I still have all the plaid, and I can move it and put the mask back on. It's not as simple as I want. Like I said, I hardly ever use this one personally. It's not the one I use the most because it is more complicated in how it works.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I think it must have to do, I think it has to do with masking. So I've got this piece I'm working on, and I want it to be gray in the background, and the characters and everything is just white. So I tend to just gray it out, and then I have to erase the white inside. So there's just like two layers. Is there a faster way of doing that?
Why are you, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Like you have this and you want the background gray and the sweater white?
Yes.
Well, if your lines are all closed, if you draw your characters with all your lines closed, I mean, you can either just drag gray in like that. You don't really need a mask for that.
Well, sometimes even when I think my lines are closed, it doesn't work. Like-
Yeah, then your lines are not closed, or your color threshold is too high.
but
So,
it's-
okay, when you drag your color into an area, before you let go of your pencil, you can drag it up or down. So like there, I can drag it down. If I drag it up to the color threshold too far to the right, if it's too high, it fills everything, even though my lines are closed. So you can, before you pick up your pencil, you can move it to the left or right to fill more or less.
But if your lines are not closed lines, because mine aren't, because they're much lighter lines, so it's never going to be so close that,
Yeah, there's, then you're gonna have to draw a flat shape like that. Oh, this one has my texture on it now, but should draw a flat layer. It's called flatting. Yeah, you have to fill in your layer with white, or you have to fill in your background with gray, one or the other, one way or the other.
but it's not about this. This is a different.
No. I mean, you could use masking to do this, but it would be too complicated, I think. I think it would be if you're just doing plain white and plain gray, there's no reason to use masking for that, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah. I know it sounds complicated, but let me just show you this example for coloring, what I'm talking about with the coloring. So I've got, different things in here, but mainly I have this inking layer. And yeah, this is what you're talking about, right? You draw ink like this. I never have closed lines because I use this dry brush for my inking, and I leave gaps on purpose because I like how it looks. So if I want to have this character filled in and the background not, I have to draw it's called a flat color layer, which is I just made a layer underneath her down there, and I colored it in with off-white in this case. It can be, any color you want. So let me do another one.
So you make a layer underneath and you call it flat.
So here I call it flat color. I have a flatting brush that just search for flatting brush on, you can find a flatting brush free for Procreate online. It's a brush that has no texture whatsoever. It's just smooth, flat color. And then
Monoline brushes like that, and calligraphy.
no, it's not.
Oh, it's not. Okay, good.
Let me show you why. This is the flatting brush, okay? And then this is the monoline brush. And they look kind of the same. But if you zoom way in, the flatting brush has just square pixels, all the same color, whereas the monoline brush fades out on the edge to have a smoother edge.
Right.
And if you're trying to do other things with it, this doesn't always work.
Right.
If
Okay, good.
you're just doing a plain color and you're just coloring the one layer in, and you're not going to do any other stuff, it's fine. The monoline brush might work fine for you. So what I do is I don't color the whole thing like that. I just outline it. I'm not going to outline this whole thing carefully, but I outline the whole thing carefully, and then I just color fill it. And that's how I make my flat layer. And of course, that one's not the whole thing, but this one is the whole shape. Now, I wanted to add more color to this, and I wanted to use the clipping mask. So I added all these colors, and I wanted to make sure I didn't color outside the line. So I went on the layer where I was going to color, and I clicked on the little icon, and I selected clipping mask. So when I colored, it did not go outside the line. So, say I wanted her color to be her hat to be a different kind of fur. I can pick whatever brush I want. And I can say, okay, I'm going to change her hat to a darker fur. And see, I can't color outside the lines. So there it clips to my flat color. So this is my flat color and I didn't rename it. I'm terrible about that. So we could just cut this. I would just call it flat. And then this one, I could call textures or colors because I added the texture and color of her. And then I added a couple more things here that are nice with clipping masks too. I was gonna say, what if I want to add shadows to her or highlights? I lit a little highlight there. These are not particularly well done, but I said, well, what if I wanted to add shadows to her? I can make another layer and make sure that it's got clipping mask checked. And then again, I can draw shadows on her and they won't go outside the line. Again, I'm not doing a great job here, but say I want to put a shadow under her neck or whatever, it won't go outside the line. And it all depends what brush you pick, what colors. A lot of times I use a layer mask, a clipping mask, and I set the layer to multiply for my shadows. And I use something like the soft brush, or sometimes I use this mist brush, and you can draw shadows in just like we did on that circle. Just go around the edge. And there's many ways to do shadows and highlights with different colors, but all of those things I want to color within the lines. So in this actual drawing that I used for something, I didn't have those. I just had the flat layer, my ink layer, and this one layer where I added all the texture and color on one layer. I just did it all at once. It wasn't for publication or anything, so I wasn't too worried about making, one layer for the solid colors and one layer for the flowers on her dress. I did it all together.
Can I ask a question about the flat again? Sorry to draw it out. So let's say you
Yeah.
have the flat layer selected and you wanted to dump paint around it to fill the background. How do you do that in a separate layer than the flat layer?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I could do that in any layer. So let's go to this layer down here. I'm just gonna erase it. So I got an empty layer that's behind the flat layer. So one way I can do it is just pick a color and do it behind the flat layer, because the flat layer hides whatever behind it because it's completely solid. So that's the easiest way to do it.
My thought was if you had a line art drawing, like a circle, and then you wanted to throw the paint in the center of the circle. How do you make that a separate layer without coloring?
Oh, okay, say we went back well, she's not solid. So let's say we had a nice solid brush, and I drew the circle, and you don't want to color it in the same layer, right? You want to do that, but in a different layer.
Right.
It has nothing to do with masks. I go to this layer that I want to use where I want to drag the color in, but I want to do it in a different place. And I make this a reference layer. Click reference. It'll say reference right in here. Now I can go to any other layer and drag color either outside the circle or inside the circle. And it will just it'll be as if I was on this layer, the reference layer. It's referring to that layer for dragging color.
But it's a different layer, right?
It's a different layer, but because I called the inking layer a reference layer, it's using that for dropping color. Of course, it doesn't work on my hat. It doesn't work any different than if you were on the same layer, because I have gaps in the line, so it's not gonna fill. It would probably work on her neck. No, because my lines are too blotchy. Yeah, so okay, if I want to color on another layer, but use my inking for the outlines and just drop color. I make my inking into a reference layer. And just click reference. Once it's checked, it will say reference right here under the name of the layer. Then you can go on any other layer and drag stuff, and it will work just as if you were on this layer. Make sure you turn it off when you're done, or you're going to try to color fill something else on another layer and it won't work, and you'll forget you had this turned on and you'll get mad. You'll think Procreate is broken. So when you have this as a reference layer, you can go to another layer and drag color out. I keep missing the dot. Drag color out, and it works just as if I had dragged the color onto this layer. Is that what you wanted to do?
Yes, you revolutionized my life. Thank you.
Reference layer is what it is. Nothing to do with masks, but very, very useful feature. Let me show you something else I do with masks. Let's see. So I got this little lady here, and I've got two layers. I've got my ink and my flat color. Again, if I wanted to just color on it, I can, if I wanted to just color on this layer and change, color within the lines, I can make alpha lock, and I can take a nice brush and I can change the color of her face. It won't color outside the lines, but it's on the same layer. So now my color layer has that yellow on it. Okay, if I don't want to do it on the same layer, I can make a layer above it, set it to a clipping mask, and now say I want to make her apron pink. I can do the same thing there. I can color as messy as I want, and it won't color outside the lines of the drawing. And now if I messed up, whoops, I went up there, I could turn that off, and it's on a separate layer. So I can go in and I can erase. I didn't want pink in her shirt, just in her skirt. So because I did it with the clipping mask instead of alpha lock, it's a separate layer. What if I wanted to put a texture on this drawing, and the texture was a whole page? This is kind of cool. What if I don't want, excuse me, what if I don't want her to be black? What if I want her drawing, the whole drawing, to be a texture? I can go here and say select. Okay, and what that did is the selection from the layer. If you go to a layer and say select from the little layer menu, it selects everything that's not empty on the layer. I can go to my texture and say mask. And now when I turn it on, look, I painted her whole thing with the texture. And I can do all kinds of things like change the transparency of it, change the layer blending mode. So that's the kind of thing I might use a mask for, a separate mask. But I just want to show you this. Take the mask off. Okay. If this layer is right above her and I said clipping mask, what would happen? About the same thing. So you have multiple ways to do the same thing. Like you can color within the lines with alpha lock and it's on the same layer. You can color within the lines with clipping mask and it's on another layer. And I could fill her line work area with a texture using a clipping mask or a layer mask. So if there's only one, if you only want to learn one of these at a time, you'll still be able to do a lot of things with it. And don't worry about, all of them. And it's not like you can only do, there's two ways to color within the lines. There's two ways to fill her with the texture. There's probably more than that. There's multiple ways to do everything, and none of them is the right or wrong way. I'm going to show you something else that I use in the coloring. Like we said before, this is my most frequently used thing for the clipping mask. So just this lady here, we'll just get rid of everything else. Just this lady here, I did the line inking. I did a flat layer. See, just the flat layer, the line inking, the flat layer. Then I added more flat colors, but for the separate parts of her. Now, it's sloppy because I draw that way and I don't care, but here's what's cool, right? The blue actually goes way out there because I used a clipping mask, so it forces it to stay in the lines of this flat color layer. So if I go back to my flat color layer and fix this, it fixes the blue. Because now this layer has changed shape. So if I erase a hole in it, the blue disappears where I erased the hole, because the blue will only go within the lines of the flat color layer. And then I did another clipping mask layer to add texture. So if I turn the colors off, the textures are still there, and they're also clipped to the flat layer. The arrows all point down, and the layer below them with no arrow is the clipping mask layer. Then I did highlights and shadows, all I can put them all with the clipping mask, so that if I added the shadow and went off here, it doesn't show. So this is what I use clipping mask for, them is coloring. For the most part, I make a flat layer first underneath my inks, right? I make a flat layer underneath my inks, and I leave the inks on while I'm coloring. Then I add more colors, then I add textures, then I add highlights and shadows, and I use them all with a clipping mask so they stay inside that first flat color layer. These also help you with selections, the flat layers. Like if I wanted to just select her blouse, now I could go into automatic selection and just do that, because in this layer here, it's just one solid color for the blouse. So it's really easy to just select. Come on, you got to keep the selection on, select the blouse, could select the headband, the headpiece, and notice the selection, whoops, notice the selection does not recognize the clipping mask. So when I'm looking at this layer, it's in the clipping mask, but if I go into the select her headscarf, it knows part of it's hidden and it selects the whole thing. So if I wanted to, change the color or do anything, let's say we want her to have a yellow headscarf instead, it changes the whole thing, but you only see it then inside the lines because the clipping mask is off. But see, it painted the whole thing yellow. And see how I did my texture, how sloppy it is, because when I turned the clipping mask off, I didn't have to stay within the lines because I put the clipping mask. And I can do as many of them on top of my layer as I want. So for the coloring, well, I don't want to do a clipping mask on the lines because the lines should show even where there's no paint. So usually I have my inking layer and then my flat layer, and in between that, I make everything else a clipping mask, everything below the ink and above the flat layer. So I can do textures and colors and shadows all without worrying about coloring within the lines.
Donna,
Yeah.
it's Audrey here. Two things. Could you please just go over that flat layer one more time? And the second question is, where did you get all your brushes for fabric texture?
Every brush I want, I Google what I want. There's all kinds of free ones and paid ones. Just Google what kind of fabrics you want.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'll find free ones, pay ones, Etsy, Gumroad. There's all different places. Yeah, so I
Okay.
just Google. Okay, flatting layer. So I've got my ink. I'm going to add a layer below it. That's blank. I'm just using this sweater one. We're going to go a little bit over time. It'll stop in a few minutes. We're going to take the flatting brush, or if you don't have it, the monoline's, not terrible, but you could Google again and find a flatting brush. The monoline's okay though. And I'm going to just outline my thing. And you can be as neat or sloppy as you want, depending your style. People who do like real comics for DC and Marvel, they are like super, super, super precise on this. I am not, because I'm doing this for myself. So I outlined it with my flatting brush. I filled the middle with color. So now I have this layer that's just the flat. And see, it doesn't even matter to me if it looks stupid when the ink's off, because the ink covers the edges, right? So now if I want to add a sweater texture to this, I can either turn on alpha lock, or I can add another layer above it and then say clipping mask that points the arrow down to this layer. And then I can go and pick a brush that's there's all kinds. I have all kinds. These are really cool. I got like plaid brushes. I got lace brushes. I've got denim. And I just Googled, like I said, I just Googled. So I can pick one of my plaid patterns and pick a different color. And above my flat with the clipping mask, I can just color my plaid in. And if you look at it without the clipping mask, you can see I didn't have to be neat at all. Clipping
Okay.
mask on and it hides the rest.
Okay,
that's
thank you.
Really what I do. And then like I might add another clipping mask, another layer in there that still is a clipping mask. Maybe I decide I just want the sleeves to be brown instead of plaid. So I can go back to a different brush. Go back to my flat brush. I can color. Oops, I don't have the clipping mask on, because look what a mess is. Look, I didn't paint in the right layer. So that was a good tip for me to check. Something's not right because it didn't stay within the lines, right? Right away, you can fix that with undo. If you leave Procreate and come back, the undo is gone. So I don't want to draw on this layer. I want to do my clipping, the layer I marked to clipping mask. And now I can, change the colors of things. And see here, oh, it missed, didn't fill in there. That's because my flat layer was too sloppy. So if I go in and fix my flat layer, now my brown, my texture, everything. Like down here, my plaid didn't come all the way to the line because my flat layer was too sloppy. So now I can, I can fix my flat layer and the plaid automatically fills up the spots. So depending on what you care about, you can be neat or sloppy on that flat layer, and it will make all the layers that you clip to it neat or sloppy. And I'm in the middle. I kind of think it looks a little bit more handmade sometimes if you have like a tiny bit of coloring outside the line or something. So that's up to you. Your precision amount is up to you. So yeah, so I guess that's it. So the two ways to coloring within the lines is to swipe alpha lock for the same layer, or to make a layer above it and say clipping mask. It's coloring inside the lines. All right, and maybe it was a little bit not as easy Here's a good question. It's not as easy maybe as I said, but it's not as hard as it seems. Pick one and work with it for a while. Like Alpha Lock's the easiest. So do some stuff with Alpha Lock 1 week, then the next week, try working with clipping masks, a little bit at a time. Cheryl says on a mask on Photoshop, it has marching ants, little ants running around. It's called marching ants. And you can change the shape of the mask that way. Can you do that in Procreate? No, it's not that advanced of a program. Yeah, if you already know Photoshop, yeah, the marching ants, Betsy's laughing. There are a lot of features in Photoshop that are not in Procreate. It's a much more advanced program. You could
So
do.
Donna, do you know if the feathering on a selection gets you a little bit in that direction, or does it not?
No, a feathering makes the edges of selection like blurry.
Okay.
Yeah, the marching ants, you can actually expand or contract the selection, and you can type in how many pixels you want to expand or contract it on in Photoshop. It's very precise. So if you make a selection and you need it to be 1 pixel bigger, you can do stuff like that. The Procreate has nothing as precise as that. No. So, but if you know Photoshop and you like it, but you don't want to spend the money on it, Affinity Photo has I don't know if it has the marching ants thing that works like Photoshop, but Affinity Photo has a lot more Photoshop kind of features than trying to figure out how to unpin my video. The Affinity Photo has a lot more features that are similar to Photoshop than Procreate does. So I don't think they ever thought Procreate would be used for professional artists. I'm really not sure. I mean, it's so easy. It's hard to think that they did that, isn't it? I mean, most of the stuff, it's real easy to get in there and draw and do stuff as far as digital things go. So yeah, so we've gone over time a little. So I may come back and spend some more time on just clipping masks and just layer masks in the future to just go over them again. Alpha Lock I think is pretty easy, but I would say if you want to learn these, just pick one, work on Alpha Lock for a week, then try clipping masks. You can ask me questions on the Mighty Network anytime, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can post questions under the YouTube also. Yeah, so I'll see you guys in a couple weeks, and we will do some more stuff.
Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you. I always needed that explained to me.
Okay,
Great.
well, I hope it was helpful.
Great.
It
Yep.
seems really easy, but then when I started explaining it, it's like, well, yeah, it's not as simple as I thought, but it's not as hard as it seems either. So
True
Yeah.
that.
Great.
I'll see you guys online. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Donna.